officer who was appointed. I can't remember the title correctly.
Sorry?
We had requested for the terms of reference of Mr. Mugwanya, who was appointed as a certain manager. I can't recall the exact title.
Yeah, that's the point we are looking at now. So we start with the capital adequacy, which we adjourned to today, and then we go to the point the Honorable Engineer Byandala is raising.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Governor, I would like to ask Mr. Ben Sekabira to take us through the capital and capitalization and insolvency issue or concern of the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
And please address yourself to the concerns we raised. We don't want general lectures. Okay? The concerns which we raised yesterday.
Chair, and through the Governor, yesterday we dealt with the two major questions. One was how deep was the level of undercapitalization before the bank was taken over, which numbers we provided. There was a negative 1.28% in terms of core capital to risk-weighted assets ratio, and the required capital for injection to keep the bank afloat was yesterday reported to have been 157 billion. This was before we intervened in the bank. On intervention, we recruited PwC to do an inventory for Queen Bank. The inventory further confirmed deeper levels of undercapitalization, and we talked about those numbers yesterday, Chair, that PwC confirmed that the core capital had gone deeper to a negative 239 billion. Chair, as we left the meeting yesterday, I recall that the question was, how do you compute the 239 billion number? Chair, if you can permit me, I would like to draw the honorable members' attention to the page in the PwC report that comes just before. In that report, I think is page 2. It's item 2.1, where the capital adequacy requirements, that is core capital tier 1 and total capital tier 2, are computed. Chair, this top part, which computes core capital, picks numbers from the balance sheet. And there's a reference for each number that has been picked from the balance sheet and introduced here in the core capital computation. And Chair, that's the way capital for a bank is computed. You include the paid up capital paid by shareholders. You include any reserves or any profits which have been made by the bank in the prior years. It is also added because these profits are retained in the business, so they form part of the capital that the bank maintains. However, you deduct certain types of assets and investments which are prescribed in various regulations. The deductions in this computation are made for goodwill and other intangible assets. There is also a deduction of a major one of 413 billion representing the losses for the current year. The year was 2016. The regulations and the law require that if a bank invests in a subsidiary, that investment drains capital from the bank. So that capital is no longer available to the bank to run its business. So that capital which is invested in unconsolidated subsidiaries and other investments is also deducted to come to the true capital that a bank uses to run its business. Indeed, in this computation, there was also a deduction for the value of loans.
Procedure Chair. Procedure Chair.
Yes, procedure.
Chair, Mr. Sekabra is talking about the deductions because we want to see how we arrive at the negative 239. I thought the procedural way was to say, this is the figure, subtract 1.1, subtract 0.2, this is how we arrive. But when it goes to keep saying, you deduct some other tangibles, the only thing he has mentioned specifically is the goodwill. And because we want to arrive at the specific 239. Because I thought you'd say 250 what, minus this, plus this one, added this, divided by this is the answer, 239. So is he proceeding right by just continuing and saying some items?
Additional procedure, sir. Additional procedure. We are looking at the financial statements which were prepared by PwC. One, I am not sure whether Mr. Sekabira is competent enough to explain accounts of another institution. Then two, we would also need to see a general ledger where these figures were extracted from. Now, this is just a balance sheet where we don't know where the figures were picked from. Whether they are cooked figures or what, we would not want to know where were these figures in a balance sheet picked from.
Yeah, but as you rightly put it, Mr. Sekabira didn't make this report. The person who made the report should be able to explain that.
No, Mr. Chairman, as you conclude on that, I think it's important to hear from Mr. Sekabira and Mrs. Vajenda, who closed the bank. First, they must have understood the figures in the audit report before those figures could give them the basis to close the bank. In my humble opinion, they are able to tell us, and the question they are grappling with is a very simple question. How undercapitalized in terms of figures was the bank? When an auditor prepares a report for you, before you act on the report, it must convince you. And convincing you means you have understood the report. I have no problem with inviting the auditors to give us additional information on how they came to those figures. But I have a problem releasing Mr. Sekabira and Mrs. Vajenda before they tell us. Because without answering that question, you have not answered the question why you closed the bank.
And Mr. Chairman, I think the best question which we didn't answer or they didn't answer yesterday, and I needed to keep on thinking, what was the level of capitalization needed for this bank? We never got this figure. Because as we talk, I want to keep on calculating.
Chair, just as we got a general ledger for Global Trust, for National Bank of Commerce, we got that general ledger, and that would be able to help us in corresponding the figures in the balance sheet. Maybe we would also need a general ledger for this, for us to be sure of the figures that we are being given.
Chair.
Yes.
Chair, we need to understand the meaning of significantly undercapitalized, because in 2015, if you can all recall, Crane Bank was named the best bank, and they received an award, and that was their 11th time of getting that award. Then immediately after 1 year, they are telling us they are closing the bank, which was significantly undercapitalized. How do you give me an award in this year? Next year, you tell me that have been significantly deteriorating.
Qualify that. We should not forget as a committee that this bank had been singled out of the many that could have bidded for purchase of NBC in almost 2013. That is hardly 4 years when it could now appear. It purchased, yes. And I think it outcompeted many other would-be purchasers. So when you read this balance sheet, the previous year's profits are zero. After competing so many other serious banks we know in Uganda, they gave us a list of them, about 20 of them. Hardly 3 years it cannot make any profits. Well, I just didn't want even to go back, but we would now wonder under what basis could it beat the rest of the competitors if the same regulator would find it now not fitting, not even having any profits in the preceding years, not even having capital negative.
And supplementary, they say there was an erosion of 195 billion shillings from the capital. Where were the supervising team? Because we have people in charge of commercial banking and in charge of supervision. So what were they doing?
I think Bank of Uganda team has taken note of the concerns of the honorable members, but to sort out this, we need to get the game of numbers correct right from the beginning. And we go back to Honorable Vyandala's question. If you did listen to Honorable Vyandala, Honorable Vyandala, may you actually repeat it?
Yeah, I just say
because it will help us start this whole conversation.
When we left yesterday, the bank could not give us the capitalization level, amount of money, and the required, and this is the figure we want to start with. What was the capitalization amount of money needed? So that from there we can start moving as we move, making adjustments in our calculation. At this stage also, when you read the Auditor General's report on the background on page 43, Bank of Uganda on 16th August 2016 signed an MOU with the CBL requiring the bank to address its capital inadequacy and directed CBL to recapitalize with 172 billion shillings by end of October. October has at least 30 days. The bank was closed on 20th October, some 10 days before October had ended. So one could now begin to be suspicious. You give me a full month to recapitalize. Before the month ends, you close. 10 days is a lot. Yesterday when there was some meeting, they were saying a bank could even fall under recapitalization within a day. Now, meaning that it could even be recapitalized within a day. Short of 10 days, it was closed, but had been given 10 days more.
Let's move this because our comments will not push this process forward. What we need are questions, so that the answer. Because if we just make comments, then they'll look at us. However, if we ask the questions so that we generate the what? The answers. And the issue here now is capitalization. We can go back to Honorable Andala's question. How much money was needed to return this bank to adequate capitalization as at the time of closure? Yes. Because this one just needs the figure.
Mr. Sekabira, address the issue.
How much money was needed to return the bank to adequate capitalization as at the time of closure of the bank?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think we should start. To start, what was the capitalization figure needed, requirement, and then you tell us at the closure how much capitalization did you need.
Let's, because this is a simple question. Can we have it, Mr. Sekabira? Mr. Sekabira.
Thank you, Chair. I'll repeat that the bank needed 157 billion to take it back to the required levels of capital.
157 billion.
Yes.
And how much did it need to start, to be given a license to start?
I think it has already started. Let's start from where the problem is.
No, Mr. Chairman, we should know how much was the level of capitalization before they would be allowed. Now it is how much they were going to add. We want to know how much was it.
You see, at the time of starting, you may not even have liabilities and assets. So the figure as at this time cannot be all that relevant, because by this time you have assets and you have liabilities. So that will determine the adequate capitalization. I don't know whether I am being...
No, Mr. Chairman, now that he has told us they needed that, he was adding it on what? Let us approach it from the other side. He says he needed 100 and something more.
Chair. To
add it to what? To make it...
Chair, Mr. Sekabira says the capital inadequacy was 157. Can we have a documentary evidence that shows us that was that, so that we have it on record?
Chairman, you asked a question which Honorable Oto insisted that must be answered, and you asked Mr. Sekabira to answer.
He has answered. Let's have evidence.
The remaining part of it.
Chair, I wanted to draw Mr. Sekabira to this particular document is referring to the inventory and the balance sheet.
Mr. Sekabira, go to the inventory and the balance sheet.
Page 20. Mr. Sekabira, you realize that under page 20, particularly under 2.3.21 of accumulated losses, they provided for the prior year's retained earnings of 42 billion. Then they also provided for the losses for the period 1st January to 20th October 2016. Now, those accumulated losses brought that negative of 370 billion, which you transferred and maintained Now on page 5, under accumulated losses, now for you to arrive, for PricewaterhouseCoopers to have arrived at those losses for that period under review, they should have made an extract from an income statement. Now, if we cannot have an attachment of that income statement, we cannot verify these losses. Especially that the previous year under review, there were retained earnings of 42 billion. So this is a first presentation of this statement, but for us to appreciate these figures, that sourcing is extremely important.
That should be directed, other than Sekavira, to me. That for us to appreciate this, we need an extra document. Then we can interpret or appreciate these figures.
Well taken, Mr. Chairman.
Can you therefore seek which document which is required, and I'll ask the government to produce that document, then we can appreciate the figures as presented. Can we have this before Honorable will come in?
Mr. Governor, we shall require the general ledger, and we shall require the income statement, or statement of affairs for that matter, for that year under review.
You want to advise?
Mr. Chairman, just to advise, the general ledger is a very huge thing on a computer T24. Maybe you'd like to ask to have a trial balance. The general ledger has all the transactions for the Crane Bank with all customers every day, and it's a very huge thing. You want to have the trial balance.
Mr. Sekavira, I want to have that huge thing.
And maybe, since you volunteer the information, we can have the general ledger and the trial balance at the same time.
The general ledger is on T24. It's on a computer. It's a huge thing.
Actually,
if we print a general ledger in hard form, it will fill half this room.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Yes.
No, with the permission, Mr. Chairman.
Can you try to sort this out?
Mr. Chairman, we need the general ledger and the trial balance. But that still takes us to what we said, you as a statutory manager, we needed the depositors listing. However big the documents are, at the time of takeover and the time you handed over, including the loans.
As a procedure, Mr. Chairman, procedure. I think, Chairman, I don't know whether I represent the rest of the colleagues. I do not know this monster called the general ledger. May I hear from the governor whether it is not possible to have the same here, or it is extremely cumbersome to have it, so that we agree on how to access it for colleagues to get the information. Because what we need is not the monster, but the information in that general ledger. I don't know if I sound so ignorant of this thing called the general ledger. I've never seen it. I don't know what it looks like. But for us to make progress, may we agree on how we can get access to the information. If the governor says it is impossible to deliver it here.
Honorable Medari, this is now accounting. And what they ought to have done, if they cannot carry because it is too big, they should have showed the auditors because they can access. And it is archived.
Be provided in a soft copy because we need to make an analysis. We need to sample this period between January.
Mr. Chairman, we can give you a soft copy.
The governor has spoken. They are going to provide a soft copy. Okay? I have closed that one. Once the governor speaks, he speaks on behalf of the entire team. Colleagues, before we interrogate the figures being given, I'm going to ask some colleagues and the auditors to look at the general ledger, the monster of called general ledger. Then we can go back to those figures. Honovoto, then...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Honovoto, Mjuche, Honovyandala.
I've been away. I've been in the village, but I was following this proceeding. I was deep down there in Aru County, but now I'm back. The people there are saying that it is the agendas of this world and Sakabira who should have been in jail and not their bodyguard and watchmen. But having said that, I have three concerns to raise. One, the statement being read by Mr. Sekabira from PwC. At that time, BOU was already in management of the Grain Bank inventory. So I put it to them that they are the ones who supplied the information to PwC. So how would the committee rely on information that those who had conflicting interests were particularly the ones supplying PwC the information, because BOU was already in management? That is my first clarification I'm seeking. You are in management, you supply the information to PwC, and now you expect us as Parliament to rely on a report.
NTV, turning on your world.